Chelsea were an irrelevance. They were on a level with QPR, Wimbledon and Crystal Palace in their own town. Then they got some ambition from Glenn Hoddle and Matthew Harding. They spruced the place up a bit and got the confidence to go out into Europe for names like Gullit and Vialli, and it made them winners again.
Oh, and a good run up front by Hughes, and Di Matteo shoots! Oh, what about this?
Steps in and maybe clinches victory for Chelsea.
Why is it Zona's through? Oh, that is a goal worthy of winning any cup final in the world. The FA Cup is back in Chelsea hands.
Chelsea were nowhere in the late 1970s, not competitively as they yo-yoed between Divisions 1 and 2, and certainly not financially as they posted debts of over £4 million and liquidators were all set to take the club. In 1982, Chelsea was bought for £1 by Ken Bates, and so began a long war waged with SB Properties over the lease of Stamford Bridge that is perhaps just too mind-numbingly dull to speak about, but long story short, in 1992, Bates won and devised the Chelsea Pitch Owners Scheme, which ensured no long-running battles with the stadium to be fought ever again. Right. Not that things were getting much better on the pitch, Chelsea still wavered between the top two divisions, with the club more so a vehicle for hooliganism to latch onto. Not that Bates had the brightest idea in the world in 1985 when he unveiled electrified pens to combat hooligans, and so the vicious cycle continued. Thankfully on the pitch they had booked their ideas up with Bobby Campbell, and immediately they returned to the First Division in 1989 before acquiring talent like Dave Besant, Dennis Wise and Andy Townsend to stay in the top division. That gave Chelsea a false sense of prestige and reputation though. Finishing 5th in their first season back was their best finish since the days of Dave Sexton and winning the cup a full 20 years ago. So when Chelsea levelled themselves out into 11th, Campbell was sacked and the club lurched to Ian Porterfield to help keep the club mid-table and sign players like Vinnie Jones and Mick Harford. It was supposed to be the Premier League, a new cosmopolitan way of playing football. Chelsea though was slumming it with teams like Manchester City, Wimbledon and Southampton, whilst going out of cup competitions to lower league opposition like Tranmere Rovers. They had to change tact, and that meant going back to the well of history and digging out the lost art of the player manager. So they signed Glenn Hoddle. He had to turn around a massive ship at the Harlington training base, where players once used to shoot off from training and dive into mucky scran and muckier pints. Now they were governed by a manager who restricted the consumption of both food and alcohol. Their style on the pitch was as traditional as they come as well, 4-4-2, and Hoddle knew that football had moved on. He flitted from the 3-5-2 that was in vogue and was winning countries World Cups and clubs the European Cup before he settled on diamond formation. All rosy in the garden then? Not exactly. Chelsea were on a run of not winning a single game of Premier League football that stretched back 10 games, and then they went and got thumped 3-1 at the Dell by perennial strugglers Southampton. Chelsea now occupied the relegation zone after 20 matches, only a point and a place ahead of the club that Glenn Hoddle had left them for, Swindon Town. As it often is in these cases, the players dug themselves out, Dennis Wise holding a clear-the-air meeting, and then everything clicked into place. The very next day, Mark Stein got the only goal of a win at home to Newcastle. Suddenly a player who had come in from Stoke had scored just one goal for the club, and then went on a bit of a tear. He got one more in a win at Swindon, two that helped win the day at home to Everton before crucial goals in 1-1 draws to title hopefuls Norwich City and Aston Villa. It was enough of a momentum to drag Chelsea into a more inconsistent mid-table vibe. As the clocks went forward and Chelsea's 14th place in the season was a big sigh of relief. Solace could be found though in the cup runners. Gavin Peacock came into his own in the latter rounds, netting goals that dumped out each of Sheffield Wednesday Wolves and Luton Town. Suddenly, after a tumultuous season, Chelsea had their first cup final in 22 years.
And
again! Outside the penalty.
Hughes! Yes! Ince! Oh, and Selfish primed the clear!
To get violated like that must have been tough, but merely to be involved in the same showpiece event with what was quickly becoming the team to beat in England was enough for this season, a foundation, if anything. And yet it was more of the same, only a bit less peril in the league and not as much fun in the cup competitions. They were bounced out of the domestic cups by local opposition in Millwall, and West Ham finished a bang average 11th in the final 22-team Premier League, but at least Europe was fun. To Vienna, to Bruges and to Zaragoza in the Cup Winners' Cup. Alright, it was a prototype run. Chelsea suffered on the continent just as their Premier League pals were, as English football attempted to creep out from under the shadow of the Hazel ban. But the club had changed. It wasn't just Glenn Hoddle, of course not, but it came from above as well. Matthew Harding had heeded the call for investment midway through Hoddle's first season as manager, and by the summer of '95, he had sunk a considerable amount of his wealth and energies into Chelsea. In currency terms, it was under £13 million, which could only buy you the knees of a Moises Caicedo nowadays, but the transformative effect Harding had on the club was miraculous. He effectively propped up Stamford Bridge physically with the construction of the North Stand. The eyes of the world were on the Premier League now, and Stamford Bridge couldn't look like a shithole anymore. That ambition was matched in the market, and on May 21st, 1995, Chelsea met a certain Ruud Gullit. The plan was a flight to Italy, meet Paul Gascoigne and Ruud Gullit and bring them back to London. The first one didn't go to plan as Gazza moved up north to Rangers, but Gullit was in. The Dutchman was playing his football at Sampdoria at the time, and given the calibre of Serie A, the move to Chelsea would be a significant step down. Then again, Gullit was on the back nine of his career and he had already conquered all of football for teams like Milan and for his country. The Dutchman wouldn't be the only big name appearing though. Dan Petrescu moved from Sheffield Wednesday and Mark Hughes was acquired from Manchester United. Talk about making a statement. Chelsea was still just an afterthought in London. After all, they had never finished above Queen's Park Rangers in the first seasons of the Premier League, and even Wimbledon had placed above them in the past two campaigns. The Blues were nothing, so there needed to be the great minds of Hoddle and Gullit, there needed to be the ambition and the deep pocket of Harding, some might even say there needed to be the experience and crushing sensibilities of Ken Bates as well. It would take this new Chelsea until September 11th to register a Premier League win, as Ruud Gullit was moved from his intended position of midfield and back into defence. The black and white of the history books won't note a marked improvement to the club, consolidating that sweet 11th place whilst going down to Manchester United in the FA Cup again, this time in the semis. But there was a very different vibe about the club. That would be transformed in the summer of '96 by outside forces. First of all, Glenn Hoddle was prized away from the Stamford Bridge hot seat by the FA, who were desperately scrabbling around for a Terry Venables successor after Euro '96. Normally this would have killed Chelsea stone dead, but they shuffled the deck. Ruud Gullit was promoted to become the club's third ever player manager, and they went big in the transfer market. It's all the names that you remember in your Merlin sticker books wearing that shiny blue kit with autoglass on the front. It's Roberto Di Matteo from Lazio, Frank Leboeuf from Strasbourg, it's Ed De Hoy from Feyenoord, it's also Parma's Gianfranco Zola, who won the hearts and minds of Stamford Bridge immediately. And it is Gianluca Vialli from Juventus, an astute piece of business on the pitch that would reward the club more so than they ever could have imagined off it. And then they came out firing for the 96-97 season, only losing twice in the first 4 months, whilst also limping out of the League Cup to Bolton in October. Normally that wouldn't be so bad, but for the events that followed, truly harrowing for Chelsea.
It had the air of a memorial service rather than a football match, as the Chelsea faithful paid their tributes for many hours before the kick-off against Tottenham. Seldom, if ever, can a club director have been mourned so deeply and so genuinely. But Matthew Harding had always identified more readily with those on the terraces than those in the boardroom.
The outpouring of grief for a man that was only at the club for 3 years was deafening. It goes to show just how much ambition and life he had injected into Chelsea in such a short space of time. On the night of his death, he is said to have been remarking that a cup triumph was possible that season. Such was the way Chelsea were playing. That would continue into a Premier League best finish of 6th place, but it didn't nearly begin to tell the story of the 1996-97 campaign. The FA Cup, Chelsea's last shot at material glory as it often was back in this time, brought West Brom down to Stamford Bridge for the 3rd round, and they were comfortably dealt with. The 4th round, however, would be different. This time Liverpool would pitch up at the Bridge, a team that had been in disarray quite like Chelsea, but a team that the Blues had a favourable cup record against. After all, they'd eliminated them in 1966, 1978 and 1982.
It was nearly McManaman, and that is turned in. Oh, it was a mistake there by Newton. Collins in for Liverpool, and it's 2. Hughes. Oh yes! Dan Petrescu nearly got there. Hughes. Now could Zola fill one from here? Oh yes! Petrescu with a lovely ball. Zola's made it. Vialli. Vialli for Chelsea.
So Chelsea were into the 5th round as the big fish of the Premier League were caught. Double champions Manchester United had been eliminated by Wimbledon, Arsenal seen off by Leeds, whilst both Blackburn and Newcastle fell to home defeats. All of a sudden, Chelsea were in a dwindling pool of top names, made even smaller by Leeds' shock home loss to Portsmouth in the next round. Frank Leboeuf's calm penalty in a replay against Leicester City, a fine cup team themselves, was the turning point. In a field with names like Chesterfield, Wrexham and Portsmouth, Chelsea were lucky to pull out the latter as the goals of Mark Hughes, Gianfranco Zola and Dennis Wise showed far too much quality for their Football League opponents. And as Middlesbrough toiled with Chesterfield and Sean Dyche up at Old Trafford, Chelsea had already started making plans for Wembley after they had dispatched of Wimbledon by 3 at Highbury. It could no longer be denied that Chelsea were favourites. They'd learned the hard way, usually through defeats to Manchester United, and their opponents come May 17th, Middlesbrough, were far from that calibre. They had been relegated, but they had also shown themselves to have a knack for a cup run. Chelsea would be hoping that Borough's trip to Wembley ended in the same result of their League Cup defeat to Leicester earlier on in the year, and Chelsea couldn't have made a better start.
Oh, and a good run up front by Hughes and Di Matteo shoot! Oh, what about this? What about this? It's possibly the quickest ever goal in a Wembley Cup final. This is Petrescu, and he's gone for the far corner, and Zola came in, and it's there!
Chelsea were now officially a good football team again. They'd got a piece of silverware under their belt. They were now playing up-to-date football and acquiring talent that matched the newfound desire. That continued into the summer of '97. Graham Lasso bought back from Blackburn, joining Celestine Babayaro in defence, whilst Gus Poyet was acquired on a free and Torre Andre Flo proved a bargain in from Norway for under £500,000. But for a few wobbles on the road in the league, the first half of the season could have scarcely been better. They were an outside shot at the Championship, trailing Manchester United by just 5 points with 13 games to go. Whilst the FA Cup 3rd round defeat to the reigning champions was a reminder of just how far Chelsea still had to go, it was a sign that the Blues were getting ever closer. Then Goodison Park happened. Ruud Gullit had taken Dennis Wise and Gianfranco Zola out of the squad and, in search of a goal to get a result, brought himself on for the last league game of his career. Then 11 days later gave himself a full run out in the semi-final of the League Cup away to Arsenal. He was going under. After another loss to Arsenal at Highbury, this time in the league, Gullit was put out of his misery. A reminder, Chelsea Football Club were in 3rd position, still had a second leg to play for in the League Cup semi-final, and still they harboured hopes of a European renaissance in the Cup Winners' Cup. In such short notice, just who could Chelsea turn to? Of course, they followed a pattern which, to be fair, had worked the last 2 times when Glenn Hoddle and Ruud Gullit gave it a bash. He was airdropped into a situation where his first match as the manager of a football club was against local rivals Arsenal and Arsene Wenger, with a chance to appear at another final. Talk about being thrown in at the deep end. Wenger's Arsenal were about to go on an incredible streak of form that would whip the league away from Manchester United. Not that Chelsea had much of a say in that one. They'd lose their first 3 league matches under Vialli to put them to bed by mid-March, just in time for Europe to return. March, however, would be a profitable time, and it all stems from Vialli's first game in charge. 2-1 down from the League Cup first leg at Highbury, Chelsea needed to win by 2 clear goals to return to Wembley.
Di Matteo picks up the loose ball, and a fine effort and a great goal! Punished. Tremendous effort, oh my word! They on the near post, Arsenal get it away with some difficulty. Petrescu!
It was some managerial debut. Vialli, who hadn't seen eye to eye with Ruud Gullit during the Dutchman's time in charge of Chelsea after he dropped the Italian for a match at White Hart Lane in February '97, now had the chance to replicate him with a domestic trophy won in front of Wembley. Weirdly enough, they'd be facing familiar opposition from the Football League. Of course, it was Middlesbrough. This time they wouldn't soar into the lead after a minute.
Dennis White. Still got his crossing. It's a goal. But he's in trouble here. Biography steps in and maybe clinches victory for Chelsea.
All eyes were now fixed on the continent, an arena in which Gianluca Vialli had great personal pedigree. First off, he had won each and every one of UEFA's trophies in a 6-year span, from the Cup Winners' Cup at Sampdoria to the UEFA Cup and Champions League with Juventus. Only this time he couldn't really play himself as much as he'd like, a shame considering he was top of the scoring charts in the Cup Winners' Cup with 6. He netted a hat-trick against Tromsø in Chelsea's last European outing, but named himself as a substitute in their next game, a valuable win away to Real Betis. By the time of the Seville club's visit to Stamford Bridge, Vialli had finally got off the mark in the league, dispatching of the eventually relegated Crystal Palace in a match where the Italian started himself and netted twice. Whilst he wouldn't score another goal in the Cup Winners' Cup, it didn't mean that Chelsea didn't enjoy a return to some fanciful European nights under the Stamford Bridge lights.
Claire making his run, and now Chelsea have to score 3. Save. Oh, it's in there. So hard to get the goals in there. That's a fantastic cross and what a header. To Hughes.
Betis swept away Vicenza gone. Chelsea were due in Stockholm to end what had been a wonderful, if a little bumpy, campaign. After winning the FA Cup and League Cup in the space of 9 months, Vialli had the chance to equal Chelsea's golden age between 1965 and 71 inside of just a year by emulating the team of 71 and claiming the Cup Winners' Cup. And thanks to a knock to Gianfranco Zola, Vialli decided to start himself. With 20 minutes to go, goalless, something had to change.
There's the man, Gianfranco Zola. He's fought hard, he's battled well. What a player he's been. Hey, Zola's first touch. The deception. Why isn't Zola through? Oh, that is a goal worthy of winning any cup final in the world.
The next logical step was to go for the Premier League. Even in a world where Arsene Wenger and Alex Ferguson were busy sweeping up doubles, there was a realistic chance that Chelsea could strong-arm their way into the conversation. They were even able to do so whilst juggling 4 competitions, bolstered even more by a Gus Poyet winner in the UEFA Super Cup against Real Madrid. They slapped Arsenal for 5 in the League Cup, went to Scandinavia 3 times to get through in the Cup Winners' Cup, and had taken Manchester United to a replay in the quarter-final of the FA Cup. Then, the season unravelled ever so slightly.
A vital goal here, and has high into the roof of the net, and Wimbledon against the League Cup holders are 2-0 in front.
Bowie is there. Oh, and Kitson was there against the post. A goal.
For the 4th time in 6 seasons, Manchester United have beaten Chelsea in the FA Cup.
Still, Chelsea held a place in the Final Four in Europe, and they clutched onto a game in hand in the Premier League because, as April came around, it still meant that Chelsea were in it with a chance at topping up their trophy cabinet. Dusty for so long it had been filled to the brim over the past 2 years. And when Aston Villa, Charlton and Wimbledon all fell in the league, Chelsea had only 2 points to make up on Manchester United. When they got a draw at home to Mallorca in Europe, Chelsea were just 1 win away from Villa Park and the last ever Cup Winners' Cup final.
Guppy on his right foot, brilliant goal by Steve Guppy! One of the comebacks of the season is complete.
Stankovic, e quel cross di Stankovic, Biagini, colpo di testa e gol sul primo palo per Biagini. Mallorca in vantaggio al quarto d'ora del primo tempo.
9 days, 9 little days was all it took to squash the European dream and to derail their Premier League title bid. The Blues fought back valiantly, Everton were beaten, Leeds were beaten, but even in a nerve-shredding rollercoaster of emotions and drop points, 4 points was just too much to make up in 2 matches. And of all places, it was White Hart Lane where Chelsea's championship ambition officially died, after only a point was gleaned from Spurs. Even more galling when Arsenal went and lost up at Ellen Road and Manchester United couldn't win at Ewood Park in the 2 days thereafter, and Chelsea really were that close to changing the course of football. A sticky autumn rendered those league ambitions dead on arrival in the 99-2000 season, whilst the League Cup was long forgotten about. A third-round tie thrown away at home to Huddersfield Town because, at last, and 45 years, way too late, Chelsea were in the Champions League. Yes, third place was now enough to qualify for the biggest competition in European football, and it changed everything. Chelsea were now shopping in markets for players like Marcel Desailly, Didier Deschamps, Brian Laudrup and Pierluigi Casaraghi. They were going to places like Milan, Berlin, Istanbul, Rotterdam, Rome, Marseille and Barcelona to try and win the top prize that the sport has to offer. And they went toe-to-toe with some of the best teams on the continent.
All alone, Gianfranco Zola must be 3-0 Chelsea.
Hey, Either attack Chelsea, either they
have a 2-goal lead, they have a foot in the quarter-final.
Attenzione, c'è Zola a destra, prova il tiro, e c'è gol di progetto.
El lanzamiento de Hoddle. Ha recuperat llença Floigol.
Towards their side, James lost it, it's hooked into the net by Roberto Di Matteo. Chelsea in front. Third time Di Matteo has scored in a Wembley Cup final.
See, there was something good to come out of the first season of the millennium. The FA Cup won again, but somehow it was the end of an era. Across 4 seasons, the League Cup and Cup Winners' Cup were won once, and the FA Cup claimed twice, chucking a title challenge, a few other European tours, and even a Champions League campaign. And that is what Chelsea were calling an era in the late 90s and early 2000s. They already knew they had to grow even more so because the club had changed beyond its wildest dreams. They were at the forefront of matching long sweeping runs on the continent with challenges for silverware back home. A far cry from the piece of trash they called a stadium when the Premier League began, Chelsea now had a recent history of winning, of playing well, of coaxing continental talent, and even commercially, they were the best in class. By 1997, they even had the largest footballing megastore, such was the new appeal of the club. They were heading in a new direction in time for the new millennium, kick-started by the left field idea to sign Glenn Hoddle as player-manager, bolstered by the incessant ambitions of Matthew Harding, and continued into the material successes of both Ruud Gullit and Gianluca Vialli. The last of those names wouldn't even see out the summer in the year they were calling 2000. After winning the Charity Shield against Manchester United and picking up 6 points from the first 5 matches, which featured ties against Cup finalists Villa, Arsenal and Newcastle in quick succession, Gianluca Vialli was sacked. A cold and callous decision, Claudio Ranieri was the next man to lead the club, a departure in that he wasn't a player-manager or had affiliation with Chelsea before taking on the role, but with similar ideas to those that had come before him. And unlike Gullit and Vialli, he had pertinent experience of winning trophies in football management, so imagine what he could do. This version of Chelsea can be accused of being a cup team, and that suited Ranieri right down to the ground. He had won the 96 Coppa Italia and the 99 Coppa del Rey after all, with teams like Fiorentina and Valencia, clubs that Chelsea were now of the same ilk as. Chelsea were obviously going places, and because of their evolution there was a place for them in both the English and European game. Just like there was in the 1960s and 70s, an era which you can discover here.